Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel Club, the Kids Graphic Novel Club. For what month is this? This is May. It's May, and our book this month is City on the Other Side, and we have here with our wonderful artist Robin Robinson, and I'm going to mispronounce this probably. Mairghread?
Yeah, that's
wow,
right.
I got it. Mairghread Scott. Very good. Okay, and welcome to you guys all here. Make some noise.
Woo!
Make some more noise. Come on. All right. Hi. How are y'all?
I'm good. Doing great.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out, and thank you guys all for coming out. It's Beta Breakers here in San Francisco, so I was expecting not very much of a crowd, and we actually have a pretty big crowd here, given how the streets are out there. Comics. Why comics? What is it about comics that you guys like? What is it that excites you, that thrills you? Why is it comics that you're writing and drawing and stuff?
Partially I work in comics defensively. I came from a family of like a theater writing family, and my mom's a reporter. And I don't have as good of grammar as she does, but if you write dialogue, then that's just the way people talk.
Sure.
And then I grew up with superheroes, and I can't solve any story without bloodless violence.
Right.
So comics was just the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I have been obsessed with comics since I was so little, and it's a whole world. You get to just dive into that world. Like animation, you're not stuck with like, oh, these actors, I don't really know that they're in the role. You're like, no. Everything in it exists to tell that story. And being able to see a world created in an art style was the best thing ever for me as a kid. I was like, man, I liked every single, one world like ElfQuest would look such a particular way versus like an Alan Davis run of Excalibur would look so distinctive, and I could fall in love with those worlds that could never exist simply because nothing looks the way it's drawn in real life. And I drew all the time, and I was like, this is the best. I can create a world just by scribbling on a piece of paper. And, I held myself to those standards. I was, so small. I was like, oh, I just want to be Alan Davis. I just want to be Wendy Pini. I just want to be all these people. And at some point, I realized, like, okay, I have to be me instead. But I can still make comics. It's fine. I can do it. And, just the ability to create a world completely from scratch. Not needing to find locations to shoot, not needing to have a prop department, but being able to just absolutely create everything yourself. It's beautiful.
But also it's funny because the way you say that is like, as a writer, it's really cool because you get to like sort of piggyback on the different art styles to tell different stories in like sort of someone else's voice. Like you get to wear someone else's art style. And it's just great. It's great to be able to tell a really, really cool story like Sitting on the Other Side and not have to write out all the perfect prose, but be able to be like, Robin, like you can draw the mood so much better. And then all I have to write is like, page 1, panel 1, it looks like this, use this reference image.
Right.
And here's the dialogue. Like I don't have to worry about anything other than writing the blueprint for the building, but I know the building's gonna look beautiful.
Sure.
Sure.
You also have written or are writing, mainstream superhero stuff, where I'm assuming that you're not necessarily sure who your artist is all of the time?
Yeah, I normally, I wrote for a long time for Transformers comics, and I got to pick my artists for most of those, but yeah, sometimes on certain books, I wouldn't know who I was going to work with right away. And that's really interesting because it actually, for me, it takes about 3 or 4 issues of a comic to really get the feel for an artist. But I like to think now, like, because with City on the Other Side, like, I research your art and, like, what, where you excelled and where, you want to play to every artist's strengths and stuff. So I try to write City on the Other Side to you. I try and write every graphic novel to the artist that I'm working with as soon as I know who I'm working with.
Sure. let's go with that in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about your earlier influences and things like that. What are the first comics you guys remember reading that like stuck with you?
Do you want to go first?
Oh, first comics that I remember reading that stuck with me. It's funny because I remember actually the first comics experience I ever had was kind of a negative one,
Okay.
which was that I really liked the X-Men, 90s X-Men TV show, which I don't know, I mean, it's probably on YouTube or something, or you guys have probably seen it. But I went to a comic book store afterwards, like over the summer break, and I wanted to, like, you know, get the next issue or read
Right.
more stories. But it was the 90s and it was X-Men, so there were like 8 million X-Men titles, and it was like
Right.
issue 437, and I just couldn't figure out how any of it worked, and it was scary and big, and so I remember switching over to like manga for years.
Okay.
And so really like the first comics that really influenced me were Sailor Moon.
Okay.
And I didn't come back to American comics until the Ultimates lines.
Interesting. Okay.
Which, by the way, congratulations, Marvel. It totally worked.
Yeah.
Because it was finally, it's like, oh, this is a starting point
Yep.
that you can go to.
Sure.
And then I didn't think about really being able to make comics until I read the IDW book Lore.
Okay. That's an interesting book.
And
To have that one be the one I can make comics based on Ashley Wood.
well, there's a really funny story about that. So remember, this is like pre-Google,
Right.
Which was because I was reading comics and I was liking comics, but like I got kind of like a little bit of a darker, more messed up tone, and there weren't a lot of women in comics, and there definitely weren't any women that were sort of rocking that like ultra indie
Right.
style, or there wasn't anything that spoke to me like, oh wow, this is special, like this is something I could really do. And then I picked up Lore, and I was like, this art style is so crazy, you can never see it anywhere else, and Ashley Wood's doing it, and if she can do it, I can do it, you know? And then I found out years later Ashley Wood was a dude.
Yep.
But by then I was already working in comics because I was convinced that if she could make it with this super cool, and I still love Ashley Wood's art, but I was like, if she can make it, I can make it. And I think it's funny because I think actually the writer for Lore, T.P. Louise, might be a woman.
It is a woman, yes.
Yeah, T.P. Louise is a woman. I thought she was a man. I thought Ashley Wood was a woman, and I was like, oh, they can make it, I can make it.
And it's funny too because I think that T.P. Louise used that as her nom de guerre because she thought that you couldn't get published as a woman.
Yeah, no, and it was such a dark, awesome, gritty story, you know. But that was my turning point in comics.
How about you, Robin?
Okay, it was X-Men for me too.
Yeah.
And I had a very positive experience because we just deep dove into everything. There were 25-cent bins. My mother also watched that cartoon with us and was like, wait a minute, maybe I'm obsessed with this now. And we just went to our local comic book store and we deep dove and we bought every trade paperback that there was at the time, and we're talking like this is 1995, so there weren't that many. Like they were just sort of starting to figure out that maybe this was a good way to do it. And I don't think they still to this day have completely figured out that that's anyway.
Sure.
But we bought those and we just we collected Generation X and New Mutants because we were kids, they were kids, it made sense, but it worked. They were wonderful, and I'd started with Generation X because it was currently running, and I don't know what, I mean, at some point, we just deep dove into continuity. We were like, I love these characters, I love them so much, I need to know everything. I need to know everything. And so we were like, okay, well, they were in this book, and we would read the little notes, and we would, this was also pre-Google, and so we just did this ourselves. And we read tons and tons and tons of it, and we were going to comic book stores, and we were discovering other comics we were interested in. You know, I was in elementary school, and I was already like, I think I'm gonna need to read Sandman soon, because this is clearly the best thing I've ever seen in my life, and I clearly need to read this. But I was in 4th grade, and the people, and we had wonderful, wonderful little comic book store owners, and they were like, maybe not yet. And they found other things for us, and one of the comic book stores that I went to all the time also had, an anime VHS rental business as part of their thing. And I mean, shout out to Emerald City Comics in Eugene, Oregon. Thank you guys for raising me. And they were also really good about, you know, like pointing us in the direction of things. Everything was just all together, and they were like, okay, that's not this. They were very good about it. But they definitely, like, we were hungry for all the manga that we could get our hands on. We were hungry for indie comics that were starting to come out. We read some really early stuff that was very interesting. And none of those things stuck with me until a little bit later when I was starting to find, like, Craig Thompson and people whose, like, the underground comic stuff was something that my parents' generation had been really, really into, and I kind of missed it. And it made sense for me to miss it, because it was really not a whole lot for a third grader. Like, there just wasn't a lot there, and a lot of what it was responding to wasn't relevant to us, too. So it was like, I missed underground comics, but I kind of was there for indie comics. And so I was reading, but also reading European stuff, like reading Tintin, and reading Asterix and Obelix, and reading all kinds of stuff. So we were reading stuff from all over the world, and I just, like, I fell in love with all of it, and I really wanted to do comics from the time I was in about 3rd grade. But by the time I graduated high school, I was like, I can't do this. It's too hard. And I kind of left it behind for all of college, where I studied art in other capacities, but I didn't work on comics. I just stopped trying to make them. I, like, left it, and it's partially that around that era, you had a lot of really sophisticated work being made, and I was 17, and my skill level wasn't there, and I was so demanding of myself. Like, I wanted to create worlds that looked like something as good as that, and I couldn't do it, and I was like, well, if I can't do that yet, then maybe I'll never be able to do it, and maybe this isn't the right thing for me, and just really left it behind. And also, I gotta tell you, in art school in the early 2000s, they told you to not do comics. I mean, they would tell you as a career move, don't ever do this. Like, every teacher I had was like, don't do this. And it was really easy to be like, well, it's really hard, and my teachers told me not to do it, so I guess I shouldn't do it.
Why were they telling you not to do it? Because they didn't think that there was money in it, or?
Yeah. It pays horribly. Right. It's like, it's a thing
tens and tens of dollars.
Yes, tens of dollars. But also, I think that for a lot of them, they're like, you know, like, I also do children's books and that world, and I was studying game art and design, and boy, does game art pay a lot better than any kind of publishing does, but a 32-page picture book pays better than a 200-page graphic novel, and it takes a year of your life to produce a 200-page graphic novel, and while it can take many, many years to do a beautiful picture book, I can do one in a much less than a year, and there's just a little bit of that. But the problem is that if you want to tell stories the way comics tell stories, then you want to do it. It's kind of a vocation, and if it's what is right for you, like, all of those years of being pushed away from it, it didn't matter, because I had to do it.
Sure.
Was there a respect thing for you too? Because I remember in college, like, 'cause I wanted to write action movies originally, and I went to NYU, and the film writing program was very much like, no, you know, like, you should write Tribeca film festivals, movies, like, and I remember, and it's funny actually, like, was sitting on the other side, like, the reason there's a mermaid in that is I remember as a kid, I would always write stories about, like, monsters and fairies and mermaids, and being told, like, well, one day you're gonna write, like, real books.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be a great author when you write real books, you know, about, I don't know, desperate Midwestern housewives or something. And I was like, no. Right. So I don't know, I feel like I don't know, on the art side, was that a thing? Like, comics aren't real art? Or
I'm sure it would have been had I gone to a less, like, vocational and work-based. Like, I went to an art school that was so focused on, like, industry work that there wasn't that same level. I mean, like, there was actually quite a reverence for this work. I mean, like, they understood that this was good. They were just like, it's so much work and it pays nothing. It's so hard to be a part of that world. And to this day, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's too bad that they look at it like that instead of looking at it as fighting to make it better.
Sure.
They're like, oh, just don't do it.
Sure.
And, you know, like, that was a weird thing. It's like, why? It's not that, okay, game artists don't get paid that much better. Like, they don't. So there's a part of me that's like, you're in art school, you know you're doomed. You're doing this because you have to do this. Why push anyone away from the thing that is right for them, right? Because none of them are great. Like, none of these are options. You're not being a banker. If you're gonna be a banker, you're gonna be a banker. You're not gonna go to art school and then go be a banker and then, like, do that because somebody told you. Like, if that's what is right for you, you're gonna know that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because today there are multiple schools that teach nothing but comics, specifically for comics, and I'm not necessarily convinced that they're telling their graduating classes the actual realities of how you make money doing that. You know, I find that kind of funny.
I have friends who went through CCS, which is, and they loved it, but they were explaining that, like any other college experience, it's not about teaching you to have the job, it's about giving you an education for, like, it's, nothing is gonna, that's not really what college does for anybody, but they actually were pretty clear that, like, that's not what they were teaching you to do.
Sure.
Like, their experience was actually very positive, and it gave them insight, and it let them develop in ways that you wouldn't have if you had been entirely self-taught in the indie world. Because there, you're just hearing what an audience is screaming at you, as opposed to talking about where this came from and challenging yourself to try vastly different things and working with people who have taken vastly different paths.
Sure.
And they actually had a really good experience with that, of seeing all the different ways you can become a comic artist, all of the different things that are a comic artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so weirdly enough, actually seems to be, again, maybe not preparing you for the financial reality, but also not claiming to do that.
Sure.
So that's good.
Sure.
Yeah, not to get into numbers, but just to give you guys an idea, the first comic I wrote, I went and I bought the cover page and from the artist, and then I also bought, IDW had like a virgin cover where it doesn't have the lettering on it, it just has the cover art, and I had that framed, and that total cost more than I was paid to write that comic.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh.
No, that is something to laugh about. But after I added it all up, and I was like, I lost money. Not a lot of money, but I lost money on that.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk a little bit about Sitting on the Other Side now. Where did this come from? What was the origin of this?
Okay, so every idea comes from, this is the one thing I always really like to tell kids, because there's sort of this idea in media where it's like you'll wake up and you'll have like your eureka moment and the story will come to you and you better write it down or you're gonna forget it. But like for me, actually, ideas develop over the course of years and they'll just sort of change and mutate. And so actually the start of City on the Other Side was when I was about your guys' age. I lived outside of a city called Detroit, and Detroit has this. Are you from Detroit?
No, my dad lived in Grosse Pointe.
Oh, okay, yes. I was like, what? Detroit has a really interesting thing called feral houses. And what feral houses are is they're houses that have been abandoned for so long that the forest has retaken them.
Yeah.
So it's like a house with like a tree growing up in the center of it. Or it's like you'll walk down a block and it'll be like one house that someone lives in, abandoned house that's half the wall is gone, and then it's woods. You know, like I met a guy once who used to go pheasant hunting in city limits. Because like, you can, especially when I was little. And there was something about seeing this like ordinary house or like being in a neighborhood and it suddenly becoming the woods that felt really magical, and it sort of felt like it made it feel like that sort of like fairy tale world was really close, you know? Because you always read fairy tales and it's in a castle somewhere far away, and I don't live anywhere like that. But like walking through the city or touring, well, you didn't walk through the city, driving around the city and seeing that was sort of the first step to being like, well, what if there is like a fairy side of a more urban place, you know? Like, what if there is a war going on between, like, the magical world and our world? And it's funny, because actually, if you guys look in there, you'll see, like, a row of buildings, where I describe that they're, like, walking, Isabel and Benji are trying to find that warehouse, and there's, like, a row of different buildings, and, like, that was sort of, like, one's all made out of water, and one is all made out of vines and stuff, and like that was the start of. I did that as like a nod to like where the book started.
Awesome.
It's page 119.
Yes.
119.
Page. Yes, it is 119. Yep.
See?
This one's going to be an editor when he grows up, I'm sure. He always does. He's like, he
Well, if you find
finds the
any
things.
continuity mistakes, don't mention it right now. It's like there's a typo.
Okay, so that's the earliest origins. How did it become this book?
Well, I knew I wanted to tell, like I was always a big fan of like the Miyazaki style fairy tales, and I had this idea where I definitely wanted to tell this story about a war in the fairy world and how it was affecting our world. But I wanted to pick a more magical city than Detroit because that was where I grew up right outside of. And I was like, oh, well, what's a really magical city? San Francisco. Because this is probably too much information. I was born here. I was born in Haight-Ashbury in the 80s.
Okay.
But we left when I was like a year old.
Okay.
So San Francisco was a city that I'd always been told about.
Right.
But I had no memory of.
Sure.
Like I didn't actually first come here until I was like an adult and I moved out to Los Angeles, like a day trip.
Yeah.
And so I started to come up with this idea that like, especially as I was researching it and I found out about the 1906 earthquake, because I remember my parents like talking about earthquakes all the time, and like when you're raised in Michigan, that's like such a weird idea that like what? Like the whole city like is just moving? Like I don't get it. Like it's probably for you guys like, I don't know, one day you'll experience a tornado or something and it's just like, oh my god, yeah, this is a real like weird thing. So I came up with this idea that there was going to be this fairy civil war and that's what was behind the earthquake of 1906, because it felt like such a sort of Tolkien event, and especially if you guys go and look at pictures of it, it really does look like, just like Smaug like razed the town. And I needed someone who was going to go on this journey, and that's sort of where you start to get like a little more personal or whatever, and I didn't want like a plucky young heroine, I guess, so I wanted this to be a story about a little girl finding her voice, and a lot of the book is about sort of being heard and about finding your voice, and so I ended up sort of coming up with Isabel as like this little girl whose parents aren't bad people, but they're really not good parents, like they don't see her. Like that's, like she's one of those little kids that just doesn't get seen, and that gets pushed to the side and is sort of pushed around a lot. And so like this was her adventure to find herself and her voice. And so then, that's how it all comes together, I guess.
And she's tough as heck. Like, yeah,
she
she's
is a
quiet.
tough little cookie.
She's quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, like in the beginning, you have somebody where like and then like, and hopefully you understand why she's quiet. Like she has no choice. She's sort of pushed to the side. She's interested in her world. Like she's so fascinated. She has stuff she's passionate about, and no one is listening to her, and no one cares. And so she never has a chance to show how super tough she is. And it's like, she accidentally stumbles into this adventure and she happens to actually be a perfect person for this adventure. And I think there's something to be said for like, wouldn't most of us be? Like, you're like, man, like no matter how shy and quiet or no matter how small you feel, you're like, if someone entrusted you with something like that, you would do your best to, see it to the end. And I think there's something about like, she's not like boring generic normal, but she is just any kid could have been her. Like anybody could do this. Anybody could have those circumstances.
Yeah, like she's not like, the vast majority of children are not living in ultra abusive households, like in desperate poverty. Like that's just not happening. But it doesn't mean that they don't have problems and they don't have issues of their own. And I liked that she is physically taken care of, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have conflict. And so being able to speak to that, because I don't know, maybe it's part of that, like when you become a writer, everyone's like, oh, how are you horribly treated as a child, and you're like, oh, I don't know, I like my parents, I've had nothing, am I gonna be bad at this? Like, do I have to suffer terribly to succeed? But, I don't know, as a kid I wanted to have a character who was more relatable.
Well, and in this we have two protagonists, one of whom had a
Benji's got a really
difficult
rough
time, and the other one had a difficult time in a different way. And seeing and like the fact that they can become friends and that she can understand and accept that some of how he behaves is like he's doing what he has to do to survive, and she's not mad at him for it. And her giving him space to be himself and to figure out that he needs to do the right thing, she gives him that space, and he steps up to it because she isn't just treating him like he isn't worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about how, like, you know, she could have been, like, a different character, someone other than Isabel, might have made things harder on him, and they may never have worked together and helped each other, because it would be much harder for him to want to help somebody who is being, who is treating him badly. But instead, it's so much easier for him to be like, oh, okay, I guess I really have to help because I can't not help you because you're actually great. And, I think that's nice. Like, it's important to talk about how friendships like that can kind of come up for anybody, and it's easier to be friends with somebody who gives you space to mess up than somebody who needs you to be perfect, because we're not perfect.
Sure. Did you pitch this originally as a graphic novel?
Yeah, we pitched it as a graphic novel, and actually the 2-page spread that's in Chinatown was in the original pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of something nice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because I had the idea and I found Robin at Emerald City Comic Con. You had a booth full of fairies, and I was like, and then we were on a panel together, ironically titled "Hire This Woman." And we got off when we were talking on the panel, we really got along together, and we got off the panel, and I was like, hey, can I hire you?
But also she sends me like a Twitter DM or something. It was like, here's this project I want to do, and it's like a laundry list of everything I'd ever want to do. And I was just like, cool, yeah, no, let's seriously, like right now. Should we just do this right now? It was great.
It worked. This project came together fairly quickly and fairly smoothly.
Yeah, I think waiting on
Really
contracts
nice.
was the longest. I feel like that took longer than drawing the book.
So what kind of back and forth did you guys have while you were sort of building it before you started drawing?
Can I feel this? I did a lot of designs. Like you had a list. I hadn't even read the script yet in the beginning. Like I had read a little bit, but you didn't have a final script for me. But you had like a list of things that you knew were going to be in there and some characters, and then just a sort of like, do you want to just design some fairies? And some parameters of what you wanted. So we're like, okay, some of these are going to be mythological, creatures from around the world. Some of them should be sort of animistic, like real objects that have been animated and become a person. And then the sort of like natural creatures also. There's like a bunch of kind of flower fairies, and so we kind of talked over what that was going to be, and then I just. I drew. Like, I just went and drew a whole bunch of stuff. We created a secret Pinterest board where we shared some inspiration, and that was really great because if I had an idea of what she was thinking, I could put my own spin on that, and it helped me to not just start from absolutely nothing. Because when I'm doing something for myself, I already have a set of parameters that I don't even know I have, right? I just have like my own personal parameters, but when you're working with somebody else, you want to know what their parameters are, because in the beginning, I'm like, well, making Mairghread happy is going to be my first job. Once we get feedback, then I'll have to, make edits based on what an editor wants, but right now, the first thing I can do is get the writer excited about what I'm creating. So yeah, we just I drew tons and tons of designs for each character, and as I came up with designs, it actually influenced aspects of the story.
Yeah, that's what I was going to actually ask, because it sounds like she was drawing before you even started writing. Which is a pretty unusual process, I think.
Well, we had an outline, and I knew where we were going to go. And I remember we were going back and forth on Isabel's race before I started with the script, because we were doing a lot of research and wanted to try and be as accurate as possible. And so we ended up making Isabel Hispanic because we were like, man, people just don't realize that there were a lot of Hispanic people in San Francisco at that time who had money, you know? And Benji ended up being Filipino because just felt like that wasn't a community that also got a lot of attention. You know, like everyone knows San Francisco and like Chinatown and stuff. And also it was important that he be a from a smaller ethnic community for plot reasons in the book. And so that was really cool, because I remember we wanted to try and be, it's funny because I feel like now we get things where it's like, it's not accurate that she'd be Hispanic. I was like, no, we did it to be accurate. And I remember we went back and forth on different design elements, so we actually pulled up a lot of comics from that era, mostly Little Nemo and Crazy Cat, and so you'll see panel designs from Crazy Cat and different artistic techniques that we pulled from Little Nemo to make the comic itself feel a little older. And we tried to do things about one of the characters' spine. She's a mermaid and she can swim through anything she touches. And so I remember once we started working together, we started to try and think of ways to play with that in the book. And so there's actually a chase sequence where she's swimming behind the panels. You can watch her sort of moving along.
It was really cool to look at some of the earliest comics as we know them, and they're like, oh, they pushed every envelope, they created the envelope and then they pushed it, right? And so it was really great to be like, okay, do you know what looks really cutting edge but is also 100 years old? Having an entire story happening behind your panels on the, like, in the gutters. And like, it was really fun to do, but it was also like, I was like, okay, I'm drawing this page, this is 2 pages. I am drawing 2 pages worth of stuff here. It was, however, like, it ended up being such a joy that I'm like, oh, I need to do this again. I need to do this again, because it let you tell a parallel story on 1 page. Oh, it's great.
Oh, the hardest thing was the map. There's one section where they're walking along, because we actually we got old maps of the city with the idea that, like, you know, I don't think there's like a couple of streets that don't exist anymore, but the idea was like, you could actually see where the characters walked in theory. But like the one problem was the way their adventure was, they were moving counterclockwise. That's not how you read as our editor.
American comics read left to right, and the action needs to go
right to left. Yeah,
and so
there's a huge back and forth with the editor over how we were going to. And funnily enough, we stole from Little Nemo because when he would get in trouble, he would just number things. Just number the order that you're supposed to read it. And so I think we ended up just numbering.
That's what we did.
Because if you're gonna steal from anyone,
it's
Windsor McCay, right? I'm not,
yeah,
yes,
Windsor
good.
McCay, yeah.
Okay, I'm so bad with names.
If you're gonna steal from Windsor McCay,
yeah,
right. I walked that path on the map. I don't live in San Francisco anymore. I lived in San Jose. You found it. I lived in San Jose when I was a kid, and we used to go here all the time. So like late 80s, early 90s, San Francisco is my magical place that exists only in my head now, and in all of our heads now, right? But I came back to visit when I was doing the book. I was like, okay, I want to be here and take photos and like draw while I'm here. And around this time, not last year, but the year before, I just walked the whole route that they took. So I had a good idea of how long it takes, which is not really that long. And I was like, you know, but I'm like, oh, they did this in the middle of the night. And I'm like, that's cool. There weren't as many cars then. It was fine. It's fine. Don't do it now. I would definitely recommend not doing that walk in the middle of the night.
If you're transported to the fairy version of this city, and it's vital to stop a war, I give you permission.
Yeah, it's probably okay.
Go on that journey.
I'm with that. You guys in the crowd must have questions. I knew you did.
Yeah. So at the end, how Isabel, when she goes into her room, she goes into that fairy world, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what happens if her parents find out and try to go in the room, and then they get transported into the other side of the, or they don't get transported and they can't see Isabel, and then they get super worried, and then they call 911, and then it's all a problem, and then she shows up.
That the next story happens. If this sells well enough, if we do another one, that is exactly the next thing that will happen, is having to deal with that. But yeah, no, I definitely think that when you go to the other side, like, people just can't see you anymore. So I don't think like they would walk in and that they would also be transported. But I think they would probably walk in and just be like, oh, my kid was supposed to be here and she's gone. What happened?
But if she was holding, like, mom's hand...
If she was
and brought
holding her mom's
in,
hand, yes.
she could bring her into the other side. And the other thing is, like, okay, if somebody is mad at her, I'm just saying, if someone's mad at her,
Kick her to the other side and
or
walk
getting
away.
through, or getting to Isabel through her parents would be a very good tactic. I'm
That's
just
true.
saying, maybe somebody unscrupulous might do something like that.
That's true. By the way, this is the weird part about our job, is that we had to have many conversations about, like, how do you go to the other side? How do you not? If you're, I remember having the conversation, like, if I was holding your hand, could we do it? Like,
Very good. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a comment.
Yes.
You know how you like fairies? I also like fairies, but did you also know that there's a movie of this dog called Benji?
oh, yeah, I've seen posters for it. Yeah.
And it's spelled the exact same way.
Yeah, yes. So Benji, there's a movie called Benji the Dog, and it's spelled the same way as Benji, who's one of our characters. Benji happens to be, this is I guess a little apocryphal. I had a really hard time trying to find out what were the most popular Filipino boy names in 1910.
Yeah.
So I just looked up what the most popular ones were for today, because I figured then at least kids, and that was on the list of most popular American Filipino boy names. So I was like, okay, I guess we're going with that. Like, that was one of the weird tricks I did. But yeah, I do like, looks like it's going to be a really good movie, so.
Cool.
I haven't watched it yet either.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Benji's from when I was a kid.
Yeah. Welcome to IP
The
Farming.
original Benji, at least. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
See? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this scene, it looks like Isabel was talking to a fire.
Oh, yeah. That's actually, I think that's an apple, right? It's like a half-eaten apple.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one you can find me the...
What
yeah,
page
we
is it?
did.
It's page 49.
I kind of heavily referenced something that they did in Young Avengers Style Over Substance. They did like a fight scene. McKelvey and Guillen like wrote a fight scene with was it Noir?
I think so, yeah.
Whoever Hawkeye was dating at the time, and they had laid it out like a building, and he was like jumping through. And I've always really loved that sort of like cross-section design. So as Isabel sort of, I'd seen it like a couple other places before, but that was really what stoked my fire. So as Isabel's preparing for her adventure and she's walking around the house, we did like one big like it's like one image of like the whole house, and you can see her moving around in like different sections. It's not quite the same, but it's close.
Yeah.
Why did you give Sky the power to go through anything she touched?
Oh, because I think if you're a mermaid, being a mermaid's cool. Instead of like the whole like, well, I'm a mermaid, but then I can't do anything if people are on land, so I guess I then have to like have legs and be a human. Like, that's annoying. Being a human's boring.
Being a human is very annoying.
So I had always thought that like definitely we want to keep her. Well, I guess technically she's a marrow.
Yeah.
But I played a little fast and loose with her design for that mythology. But yeah, so I think that's really cool. Like if you were walking along one day and like a hand like reached out of the ground and like pulled you into the ground, like that'd be really scary.
Yeah, cool's not exactly the word that I would.
Cool, terrifying.
If you had to take a way to go, it might as well be a terrifying mermaid dragging you through the floor.
I don't know, in a
It'd be
weird,
fast.
well, because it was like, because everyone was like, oh, mermaids are kid stuff, so it was like, well, if I'm gonna finally put one in, no one's gonna say that. Like, we're gonna make this frightening. That's legitimate.
It makes her a really, like, effective hunter. Because she can go through anything.
She's incredibly effective, actually, when you think about it. Except then as a writer, the secret with writing is whenever you have a character that's good at something, you have them face off against a character that's better at that thing. And so we had her face off against Mairghread, who's, you find out, is a grasshopper spirit, so he can fly, you know, and so that makes her job harder.
Also, she can pass through anything, but like, she can't travel back and forth between the two worlds very easily, which of course which our heroes are doing. So it's like, yeah, she's a really great hunter, but the one thing they can do is something that actually kind of defeats her.
Sure.
So.
Sure.
Yeah, everyone's gotta have their own special deal.
Yeah.
Did Coach Rock get trapped in the diamond?
Yep.
And how did he get trapped in there?
Oh, if you look at that panel, if you read the story a little more, as you see that Idnaris is cutting along the ground as she's talking, and so when she's actually building that trap as they're having that fight, and when he walks into it, it's finished being built. That's what sucks them in. So yeah, so if you're reading through that, and they're just flipping through this right now. I feel like you did a really good job of explaining that if you read the scene, but yeah, that's a special kind of trap that type of trap you'll see in Occidental magic a lot. Not that specific design, but that idea of like making a seal on the ground and holding something inside that seal.
Okay. So here is about. Are they in the fairy side of the veil?
Yeah, because the apple talks to them.
Okay, so she's dumping out clothes from her suitcase. So that's funny because her bed is still there with everything on it on the fairy side of the veil. And
yeah, well,
it's like,
some of her furniture would be there, but would all of her furniture be there, or would she have had to grab some of her stuff, or did we not put it on the side of the veil at that point? No, she would have had to have. They must have been going back and forth across both sides.
Yeah,
or we just made a continuity error.
Because that is on the fairy.
Yeah, it is on the fairy side.
Here's actually what I was thinking about with this. There's something, like, remember what her dad's job is? He's a sculptor. He doesn't know it, but he's already a little more on that side than anybody. Like, remember all of his statues? He has all those, like, junk statues when she goes to visit him. There's all these junk statues sitting around. And the junk. And they are like, they're still there when they cross over.
They are still there.
And they can be brought to life. And I think, like, I would like to think that they are going to continue to, I don't think that got reversed. I think that they're going to be good and quiet because they sort of respect his work and how much work he put into them. But I think that they were already, like, they had the potential for that. My feeling, and this is because I'm an artist and I have strong feelings about this, I think that being an artist makes you already a little bit on the edge. And so that whole house is a little bit shiftier. Why was Isabel able to see, I mean, like, everything that happened there would have not been as possible had it not been an art, like a sculptor's cabin out in the beautiful magical redwoods. So not only is he lucky to be sort of like horrifyingly not as far away from the action in the first couple pages where you're seeing this terrible, terrible battle go down, like, that's not particularly far away from where his little, like, art retreat is, but also I think that you know how whenever they cross back and forth, and it's always the very magenta red magic when they're using the heart, but when Idnaris does it, it's like she's just moving aside gossamer fabric, and I think it's really thin around that area. So some of that house exists in both sides.
Well, I've always thought that, like, the basic geography of everything stayed the same, and like the biggest sort of, it's like the most, it's weird to say like emotionally sturdy, but like the biggest aspects of any room would probably stay the same, but the little things would change. So yeah, I guess that's like a question. Yeah, it's That's a good catch. We could have explained that a little better. Good job.
Cool. Tell me, let's talk a little bit about like your process of working. Full script?
Oh yeah, always. I've written Marvel style once. I don't like, so I don't know if you guys know, Marvel style is basically like you write a really loose outline of what the script is gonna be. You're like, on this page, these kinds of things need to happen, and then you give it to the artist and they draw it. But it's kind of, it's like a game of telephone. Like what they draw is not exactly what you thought, especially if you don't give them a lot of detail. And so if you don't give them very much detail at all, like with Marvel style, you essentially then have to go back and rewrite the story again once you get the art. And so it's just infinitely more work for, I think, most of the time, a less focused story, because the artist doesn't know doesn't get the nuance of what you're trying to work with.
Sure.
It doesn't let people work together as closely.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that can work really well. That iteration, that iterative process, I think could be really effective if you knew you were going to have the same team month to month, and if you were sort of able to sit down and have a meeting every, like, couple issues. You're like, okay, now here's what's going on. But when it's a little bit like they can bring any artist in and they can bring any writer in, which is why it's done that way, so that people are replaceable.
Well, you know, it's interesting because actually the first, I was working on one of my Transformers comics with an artist named Sarah Stone, and she actually had a Cintiq that was, when we were thumbnailing, she would read through the script with me and we would live stream. And so I would watch,
That's
so I would
cute.
be able to be over her, basically like over her digital shoulder, and it's like, okay, so I would go through her thumbnails and give her notes, and she'd be like, oh, do you mean something more like this? And she would draw it, and I'd be like, yes, more like that, or something more like
That's
this.
awesome.
And I think, actually, that would be a thing where I could work in Marvel style.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you were physically in the same room with an
Yeah.
artist, if you were able to always be talking, and they were able to always
Sure.
be talking with you, then that would totally work. But I think unless you were able to integrate that much, you're
Yeah.
just not able to get as focused a story as I think people want now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that what you're describing is when I work on independent stuff with my partner, that's how we work. Is like we just sit down, like he'll write a script, like we'll plan out a chapter, he'll write a script, and then we'll sit down and thumbnail it, because as you know, no matter how good you are at writing comics, you
Yeah.
will write things that cannot be drawn as you wrote them, and you will write things that actually need to be separated into more pages. I mean, like, there are just things.
I literally have written "I'm sorry"
Yeah.
on some of the writing. I'll describe something and I'll be like, I don't really know how this would work. I'm sorry. Like, and it's awful too when you get, like, once I realized how good you were, that when I realized I have a good artist, I push it more to write more impossible things. And it's like, I'm so sorry.
How many drafts did you go through?
I have no idea. Probably about three for the script, and 4 for the outline, and 4 for the premise. I don't like rewriting, so I really plan everything out way in advance, and I don't deviate from the plan. So I just write the premise, get it rock solid, and then just build it out more and more. That's partly because I think I work in animation, and that's how things sort of work. That's how things work in animation, is once you've decided that this is something you're going to do, people are already designing and going, so you can't, it wastes money to change things at the end.
Sure.
So I almost never change anything. Whatever's in the outline is going to be in the script, like, period. So I take a lot of time to make sure that the premise is exactly what I want and the outline is exactly what I want, so that I don't have to do as many drafts of the script, because I don't want to. Because the other thing too is, it takes me 6 months took me 6 months to write that book, and if you have a really good outline, you can just trust. You don't have to be constantly referring to what you wrote a month ago or what you wrote 2 months ago. You can trust your outline so that you can move faster.
did they give you more notes? Like when you were actually working, did they give you more notes in the outline stage?
Yeah.
Did they, like they also, it was more about like building that, they also trusted that the final script was gonna, because I remember that we didn't get a lot of edits towards the end at all.
Yeah, it was much more notes on the outline stage, and then also I'll do a separate lettering script once the art's all in, you know?
Yeah, I made some changes to the script when I was working on it
You
too.
did, yeah.
We talked back and forth, and there were things that like I glazed over when I was reading it because I was so focused on the action. And then when I sat down to do a page, I was like, this is more dialogue that is going to fit on this page. And every once in a while, there's a thing where it's like, can we lose this joke to focus on this one? Like, can we make sure this piece of action gets fully fleshed out? And not worry about this other thing.
There was an unusual amount of dialogue cuts. I'm actually kind of a talky writer, and I really wanted this book to be about Robin's art and to feel like the world was really. So I mean, I always tell my artists that if you can think of a better way to do it, or you think of a different way to do it, just do it, and I'll accommodate. You know, as long as it doesn't change the plot, I don't care. I write really detailed full scripts because I don't want them to wonder what they should be drawing.
Yeah.
But if they want to draw something else, that's totally fine. It's just I view it as my job to make sure they're not like, what's supposed to be on here? So like if I said like Isabel's walking up to a table, I tried to be like, and here's a link to what that table might look like. But at the same time, like that's why we do lettering script, is because you were like, no, I really want 2 pages to do this, or I want to break this up a different way. And it's like, that's fine, then the script will just go back around and accommodate that.
Yeah, and I would still, like, I did lay in the text. Like, I didn't do the final lettering for this.
No,
thank you, Warren Montgomery.
Yeah, fantastic job.
Yeah. But I did lay in the text, so I had an idea that I was leaving enough room, and it's still kind of like, it almost wasn't enough still because I wanted to really cram. Yeah, but also like there was so much world to get in there, and I still like I will wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, I should have done. Like there's like I still am living in that world a little bit, and I'm like at this point it's been a couple of years since I drew that, and I'm like, that's still in there. Like I'm still thinking about like what could have been packed tighter.
Yeah, I think I wrote this book. I think I wasn't even pregnant when I started writing this book.
Yeah.
I've got it. My
He's
kid's
like
like
almost
1.5.
2 now,
He's
yeah.
almost 2 now. Yeah.
When you got the script, did you do a layout pass?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. I took a month to do layouts, actually. A little less than a month. I had maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I also had the flu and had a fever for a huge chunk of it, and it helped. Did not hurt. Totally helped, actually, because it let me sort of like be really intuitive about it and let it flow a little bit. And later on, I tightened everything up when we did page to page, and there were, I think at the end, there were only 2 sequences of pages that we ended up needing to edit at all from my first layouts. Like, I had no edits on them. There were no edits on the layouts at all. It was actually like when I finalized a few pages, we were like, oh, I'm not sure this is clear, and I do not regret anything that we edited. Like, there were so few edits at the end, and every one we did, I was like, you're right, this is good, it made it better. And it was really that, like, some of those action sequences, maybe, like, I think that doing it quickly and really being in the flow of it was great for all of the scenes that otherwise would have been a little bit more staid and standard. But for some of the action sequences, I think I'm like, oh yeah, no, I lost the plot there. A little too feverish for that, and I had to go back in and like actually add panels.
It's interesting that you laid the whole book out in, you said 3 weeks. It's like 210, 220, something like that.
Yes.
So you were
It was
doing
crazy.
10 to 15 pages a day of layouts?
Of just layouts, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I mostly thumbnailed. Like, I didn't
sure.
do huge things. I listened to the same album like 20 times a day.
Yeah, what album?
Art Angels by Grimes was like, I don't know. I mean, I said I had a fever. It was perfect. It was like, it's like that, it was January or February. I think it actually was like part of January, part of February, and it was right around my birthday.
Were you, as the kids say, straight tripping that whole time?
I was straight up.
You
I was
didn't
just
even
gone.
know this.
No, of course not, because I didn't want to tell anybody. I had no idea that I could have said I need an extra month here. I was like, no, I'm just gonna do it. And I just did it, and it was very, like, I have never laid out 211 pages in one sitting. I usually lay out a page at a time. Like, I really tend to not do thumbnails or something until I'm doing it. It's definitely better. I totally am like, no. Now I'm like, no, you should lay out everything long before you work on it. It's like, it's a gift for your future self. And even if you don't stick to your layout drawings, it's a gift to your future self to do it. But it was quite an experience. It was a very weird experience, but it was good. And it's that, like, I sat down with that script and I'd already read it a couple times, but I was finally reading it, and like, this book was where I went from visualizing things as animation to actually visualizing things as a comic. It took until this book. And it has changed me, and it made me a better comic artist, because I really had been like, I would read a script and I would see it happening, but I wouldn't see it in comic panels. And there is a big difference between animation and comics. In animation, the movement and everything is happening in front of you, and camera angles are used a little bit, but you're mostly like, you're watching it happen. For a comic, it's not linear. It's not frames per second. It's not happening straightforward. It's all happening at once. And you can have, like that page with the cutaway of the house, you can have so much action happening in one solid space. And all of, like, being able to actually break the beats down that way, instead of just trying to have every panel be, I mean, like, I think there's a phase for some, especially for people who are like kind of straddling different media that they're really into. I do think you can get stuck thinking of comics as though they're supposed to be storyboards, and I did a lot of storyboarding at college. So I think I've been very stuck in the idea that comics are just storyboards, and they're not. And it's terrible to be stuck in that. It's actually drastically more work than you need to do to tell a story not very well. And but this was like, and it was partially doing those layouts like that, where I was like, wait a minute, I finally understand the script the way it should be. Like, I understood how you manage to, like, get these things to actually happen on a page, instead of just seeing the story as a story.
Although I will say there's one thing where, because you were like, well, we didn't do any notes and stuff, is we do give a lot of notes, but we tended to do a thing where it was like, what I like to do, which is you give notes, and if it's not drastic enough, it's just like, in the next step, change it to this. You don't need to go back and redraw to show us. Because I remember there was nothing that I was like, oh, this is catastrophic, and it's like, just in the next step, change this to this. In the next step, change this to this. And that's how a lot of comics goes, is when you get to script, make sure you hit this.
And it occurs to me that one aspect of how we did this was that I passed everything by you before I passed it by the editor, which I think,
did a first notes pass.
Yeah, which was nice. It was nice because it let us feel like we were working together directly instead of using an intermediary, which was actually, and they were very delighted for that too, because it was less time waiting and less, honestly, it made their job easier, because there were things that they were not, like, nobody knows the story as well as you. You wrote it, you lived in it, you know that story in ways other people, like, you know things about the story that aren't in the book. And it meant that you could catch things, and you could move me in a direction that an editor might not even know was important.
Well, and also, if they had an issue with it, we knew where we were coming from together.
Yeah.
So we could address that.
Yeah, and if it was something that we wanted to hold on to versus not, and I don't remember there being a lot of arguing. Like, I don't remember there being maybe at the time I would have had some more, but I remember it being pretty straightforward.
Do you guys have any more questions? Just want to make sure I get everything from you guys. All right, so I got two more questions for y'all then. Probably particularly for Robin. One of the things that I liked about this book so much was just the imagination of the fairies, and the imagination of the world, and even like small background characters like this one on the bus who's got a mirror for a face, and it's just a character who appears, I think, one time in the entire book, and you never see it again. Was that hard? Was that fun? Was that, yeah.
it was very natural for me because I love character design and I love crowd scenes and I love having that, like, nothing makes you feel like you're in a world more than seeing all the inhabitants and imagining that every single one of them has their own story.
Yeah, background weirdos.
Every single one of these background weirdos, you're like, what's their story? I knew stories for a bunch of them, and sometimes Mairghread gave me a lot of good notes, like, and would be like, okay, I think we want, and would give me like one Udo here, and I mean, like, we actually would have lists of, like, we talked about lists of different kinds of mythological beasties. We tried to be careful to pick things that we thought were fairy or yokai, like this sort of folk creatures, as opposed to, like, very, like, religious, like, no, not as much gods and religious figures, because that's not what we're doing, and that can definitely get into the disrespectful side.
Yeah, our rule for fairies was anything that's supernatural that is not actually considered a god or a deity in any kind of way.
Or at least not in the very Western sense, because there's, yeah, but yeah, so we were very, you know, like, so we had some things that we wanted in there. Some of these are, I mean, like, if you want to go through, some of those creatures are folklore creatures, like that hedgehog that is on fire. Oh my god, I love
the hedgehog that's on fire.
It's a real thing. I think it's Basque or something.
Is
yeah.
it?
Yeah. I keep thinking it's Basque and you think it's something else. I can't remember. I usually could remember, but it's too... Yeah, like a bunch of these, like, there are lots of creatures in here that are totally mythological creatures, and it was
Hopping vampires, that weird wheel that's got a head.
That's the one you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And lots of great, you know, like, and we were definitely pulling from cultures that we knew had a huge influence in San Francisco, like in making San Francisco. But yeah, no, like, just like every character, like every background weirdo was like, oh, she has a kid and they're on their way to see somebody, or they're going to work. There's lots and lots of nature spirits going to work, because that's still like, you're still at the tail end of the Industrial Revolution. Like, it's like, that was what was going on. We did a ton of, like, the historical research was a big deal. And the mythological research was really easy because that's like folklore and all of that is like second nature and important for, like, very, you know, like, it's stuff that, you know, is a really important aspect of, like, not just my work, but like everyday life interests, like, so that was great. But being able to push away from just creatures that you might have heard of into, some of these are like animate furniture.
Yeah.
If you get into the, like, that Chinatown scene, and there are shops where some of the shop fixtures might be alive and people, but there's also shops that are selling very turn of the last century
like
fashion.
Cricket legs at one point.
Yeah, there's all kinds of street food. There's street food that's made of giant bugs that I'm like, kind of looks delicious. I'm up for this.
But then you meet Miori.
That
makes the ethics weird.
Hey, I mean, like, I don't think it's too weird. It's a giant, like, it's just a giant bug. It's not a bug dude. Yeah, it's not the same.
Cool. So the last question I'd ask, and to wrap this up a little bit, is I know that some of the kids here are interested in doing comics. Certainly know that as this gets, you know, watched over the internet, you're definitely talking to people who have an interest in doing a career in comics. What would be your piece of advice to people who want to enter the arts, comics in particular, particularly young people?
This is gonna sound kind of counterintuitive, but you don't have to be good at the start. And you won't be. Like, there's this weird thing where, like, you know, maybe you're the best in your class at writing or drawing, and then you go to the next grade and then you're not, or you go to high school and then you're like, oh man, everyone's better than me. And then you're the best in your high school and then you go to college and you're like, oh man, everyone's better than me. And then you're the best in your college and you go to the professional world and you're like, oh, everyone's better than me. And that's like that was really upsetting for me as a kid, because I did really well in school. But I think it was like Neil Gaiman who said, he might have stolen it from someone else, but I remember him saying that there's like a triangle of what you have to be to succeed professionally, and that's on time, easy to work with, and good at your job. And you actually only need to be 2 of those things to work. If you do all 3, you're like super awesome. The one other thing to remember is that you're not good at your job. So you need to be on time and you need to be easy to work with. But when you're just starting out, that's okay. Because the people who are better than you because they've been doing it for 10 years know that you haven't been doing it for 10 years. And 10 years ago, they were probably where you are. So just let yourself keep trying, even if it's not perfect, and sort of, which that sounds awful, but it's okay not to be as good as the people that are at the top of their game because you're just starting out.
It makes a lot of sense.
There's room for a lot of different kinds of work and different kinds of stories. So yeah, on the one hand, it's like, for a lot of us, we're perfectionists, and figuring out how to use only the parts of that that help you and trying to let go of the parts that hold you back is really difficult. It's possible, but it's difficult, and I struggle with that. But yeah, like, understanding that it's okay that you are not now as good as you will one day be is nice, but the other side of it is to understand that, like, that's really subjective and not objective at all. That the people you think are the absolute best, there's someone else who reads comics and doesn't even know who they are. Has never read anything by them. They read a completely different set of comics, and it's easy to be really elite about that, and it's really easy to believe that there's a really specific, you know, like, it's really easy to believe that, like, oh, this is what's good, and everybody knows this is what's good, and if you are stuck there, you don't get anything new. So understanding that, like, okay, I may not be as good as I'm going to be someday, but also I may be able to do something no one else can do, and I may be good in a way that I don't recognize yet.
Yeah.
Like, the work I'm doing that is, like, maybe not my best work is still pretty good to someone, and kind of, like, leaving that open, because it can be really hard that, like, there are people who feel like their job is to tear you down and put you in your place and dissuade you from doing this. Because they see everybody as a threat, and they also maybe have built themselves up by doing that.
But you know what? Those people always unmask themselves
They do.
at some point.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the best, and when it happens, it's the best thing in the world. I remember there was one guy, because you're not supposed to read the boards, but I do read the boards. There was one guy who hated my comics. He hated my Transformers comics so much. He would always talk about how I was, like, the worst Transformers comics writer ever. And then he read, like, some, like, one-off I did, and he didn't think it was me. He thought it was this other writer, John Barber, who was also doing Transformers comics. And he was like, this comic, like, is the best. Like, John Barber knows how to write Transformers. And so it was like, that was Mairghread skin. And he was like, oh, well, I guess she didn't suck this time around. And I was like, ha-ha! So yeah, like, you just never know. And some people will just never like you, you know, just don't like your style of writing. Like,
and
it's weird
room for
because
everything. Like, there really is.
yeah, it's weird. It's weird on the writer end with that because your work is so much more hidden by the artist.
Yeah.
You know, like,
I would say it's very, I mean, like, it is terrifying as an artist, though, to know there are people who don't like your work. Because that's all
yeah.
I mean, like, nobody thinks about what an artist brings to the table other than the finished product. There is no concept that you are also doing research, that you are also developing, that you have to go from a script to a visual, and that's an entire skill set that is not just, it doesn't happen. You don't just put your pencil on a paper and then, like, the panels come out the way they were written. Like, you have to interpret a script and bring something new to it, and boy, is that a lot. And no one ever talks about that because it's completely ephemeral. So there's a bit of, like, all of that is work, and all anyone sees is, like, whether or not they like how you draw eyes.
yeah.
And it comes down to that. It's always something like that, where they're like, I don't like how this person draws eyes. I don't like the colors that they use. And you're like, that's fine. And I think both of them are really personal. But with writers, there's a bit of, like, they give you a lot of ownership. So if they don't like your writing, it's like, it's not just an aesthetic thing, right? Like, with artwork, like, they can just be like, well, I don't like how they draw eyes, right?
Yeah.
But with writing, they're just like, not only do I not like how you wrote this, I don't like you as a writer, and I don't like anything you will ever come up with. And, like, there's a little bit of that, and I can see that being...
You have a bad morality and you're terrible at feeling.
Well, I think you guys did a fantastic job with this book. You guys think so too, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
You really like this book? Yeah.
Thank you.
And you guys all want to see more, right? If they do another one?
Sure.
Great. So, I mean, I'm actually really excited that you guys have a potential sequel in mind for this. Would it be called The City on the Other Side 2, or is it
I mean,
a
we'd
different
probably
title? or-
do like. I'm gonna be really honest. I'm terrible with titles. No book I've ever written has kept the original title.
Oh yeah, this is like the third title.
That's like the third or fourth title.
Okay.
Originally I think it was called The Cold Iron Wars.
Yeah, before that, the script
But, yeah.
you gave me
Yeah,
was
right?
Down by the
That's
Bay.
not
Yes,
really-
You gave me Down by the Bay.
Oh yes, yeah, that
So
was
this
true.
is at least the third one.
And then they
Yeah.
were like, where the watermelon grows, and I was like, dang it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So who knows what it'll be titled, but maybe it'll exist.
Yeah. Well, the book was The City on the Other Side. If you're watching this at home and you haven't read this book, I strongly urge you go out, find yourself a copy. It's a fantastic book, just filled with magic and wonder, and you're gonna love it. Next month, our book is Rocket Robinson. It's hard to say. Rocket Robinson and the Pharaoh's Fortune. Sean O'Neill, who's the author of that, is going to be here June 10th. So plan that out to be here. And I think you're going to like that book a lot too. And if you can't make it, then you can always watch it on the video. You can send us a note, man, and we'll read your question online. So thank you very much for coming out. Thank you two for being here. I really like it. Thanks so much, and thank all of y'all for coming out on this day. We'll see you next time. Take care.